It was a cold, blustery night in December, one of those evenings when the wind seemed to cut right through your clothes, no matter how many layers you wore. I had just finished a late shift at the office, the kind of long day that leaves you both physically and emotionally drained. All I could think about was getting home, making myself a hot cup of tea, and collapsing on the couch. I had just stepped out of the subway station when I noticed him, a boy, maybe 16 or 17, sitting against the wall, his knees pulled up to his chest. His clothes were too thin for the weather, his shoes worn down to the point where I could see his socks peeking through the holes. He had a cardboard sign in front of him that read, "Hungry, anything helps." People walked past him without a second glance. Some even averted their eyes, perhaps uncomfortable with the reminder of life's harsher realities. I paused for a moment, watching as he shivered against the cold. Something about his downcast eyes tugged at my heart. I couldn't just walk by, not tonight. Not when I was minutes away from a warm home and a hot meal. I walked over to him and he looked up, his eyes wide, as if surprised that someone was actually approaching. "Hey there," I said softly. "You hungry?" He nodded, his lips slightly chapped and trembling from the cold. "Yeah," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Come on," I said, nodding towards a small diner across the street. "Let's get you something to eat." For a moment, he hesitated, as if unsure whether to trust me. I tried to give him an encouraging smile, and slowly he got to his feet, his movements sluggish from the cold. We crossed the street together, and the warmth of the diner hit us as soon as we walked in, a welcome change from the biting wind outside. We sat down at a booth, and I could feel the eyes of the other patrons on us, some curious, some judgmental. I ignored them. The waitress came over, and I gestured to the menu. "Order whatever you like," I said to him. His eyes widened again, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of hope in them. He glanced at the menu and ordered a burger, fries, and a hot chocolate. As we waited for the food, I tried to make small talk. "What's your name?" I asked. "It's Kevin," he said, his voice still quiet. "I'm Grace," I said, smiling at him. "It's nice to meet you, Kevin." He looked down at the table, his fingers tracing the edge of the napkin. "Why are you doing this?" he asked after a moment. I shrugged. "Everyone needs a little help sometimes," I said simply. "And I think everyone deserves a warm meal, especially on a night like this." He nodded, but didn't say anything else. The food arrived, and he ate slowly at first, as if he was trying not to look too eager, but eventually hunger won out, and he finished everything on his plate. I ordered him another hot chocolate to go, and when we left the diner, I handed him a $20 bill. "Get yourself somewhere warm for the night, okay?" I said. He looked at the money in his hand, then up at me, his eyes glistening. "Thank you," he said, his voice cracking a little. "I mean it." I nodded, giving him a soft smile. "Take care of yourself, Kevin, and remember, things can get better." He gave me a small, shaky smile, and then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I watched until he was out of sight, a pang of worry in my chest, wondering what would become of him. But life has a way of pulling us in different directions, and as the weeks and months went by, I found myself thinking about Kevin less and less. Eventually, he became just another memory, one of those fleeting encounters that fade with time. To understand why that cold winter night stayed with me for so long, I need to take you back to the beginning, who I was before all this happened. My name is Grace Hamilton. I grew up in a small town in Connecticut, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else. My parents ran a small bakery on the corner of Main Street, and I spent most of my childhood helping out after school, flour dusting my clothes, and the sweet smell of pastries in the air. My parents were hardworking people. They taught me about the value of compassion, how sometimes the smallest gesture could change someone's day. My mother used to say, "A warm loaf of bread can do more than just fill a stomach. It can fill a heart too." And I suppose that's where my belief in helping others began. I saw my parents give away bread and rolls to those who were struggling, and they always did it without expecting anything in return. They believed that kindness was its own reward. I carried that lesson with me when I left for college. I moved to New York City, chasing a degree in business administration, hoping one day to make something of myself. Life in the city was vastly different from the small-town comforts I'd known. It was fast-paced, and for a while, I felt like I was constantly trying to keep up. After college, I landed a job at a consulting firm, and though it paid well, it lacked the sense of fulfillment that I had felt working in my parents' bakery. Over time, I settled into the rhythm of city life, working long hours, navigating crowded subway stations, and spending my weekends trying to catch up on sleep. It wasn't that I disliked my life, but there was an emptiness to it, a feeling that something was missing. I tried to fill that void by volunteering at soup kitchens on weekends, helping to serve meals to those who needed it most. It wasn't much, but it helped me feel connected to something beyond the spreadsheets and board meetings that dominated my weekdays. It was on one of those volunteering weekends that I first noticed how many teenagers came in looking for a meal. They were young, vulnerable, and often alone, just like Kevin that night. I remember one young girl, maybe 15, who came in wearing a threadbare coat. She smiled when I handed her a bowl of soup, and I could see the gratitude in her eyes, but also the exhaustion. She reminded me that everyone had a story, and some stories were harder than others. That night, when I saw Kevin sitting there, shivering against the cold, I thought of all those teenagers who came through the soup kitchen. I thought of the girl with the threadbare coat and of my parents, who never turned anyone away from the bakery if they needed something to eat. Maybe it was all those memories that made me stop. Maybe it was my own need to feel like I could still make a difference, even in the smallest of ways. Years passed. Life moved forward as it always does. I changed jobs, moved to a different part of the city, and settled into a comfortable routine. I still believed in small acts of kindness, but I rarely thought about that night in the diner. Then, one day, out of the blue, I received a letter. It was addressed to me by name, but there was no return address. I opened it, curious, and was surprised to find an elegant invitation inside, thick cardstock, embossed with gold lettering. It was an invitation to the grand opening of a new 5-star restaurant downtown. The name of the restaurant was Kevin's Table. Confused, I read on. There was a handwritten note at the bottom of the invitation. Dear Grace, you may not remember me, but I have never forgotten you. Years ago, on a cold night, you offered me a meal when I needed it most. That simple act of kindness changed my life in ways I can't even begin to describe. I'd be honored if you would join me for the opening night of my restaurant. Please consider this a small token of my gratitude. With all my thanks, Kevin. My hands trembled as I read the note, my heart swelling with emotion. I remembered that night so clearly, the cold, the way Kevin had looked at me with those haunted eyes. I had wondered for so long what had happened to him, and here he was inviting me to the grand opening of his very own restaurant. It was almost too incredible to believe. On the night of the opening, I dressed in my best outfit, my heart pounding with anticipation. The restaurant was beautiful, all polished wood and soft lighting, with a warm, welcoming atmosphere. I felt out of place among the other guests, all dressed to the nines, but I pushed my nerves aside and stepped inside. A host greeted me at the door, and when I told him my name, his eyes lit up. "Right this way, please," he said, leading me through the bustling dining room to a private table near the back. Standing there, waiting for me, was Kevin. He was older now, of course, taller, broader, with a confident smile that I barely recognized. But his eyes were the same, and when he saw me, they lit up with a warmth that brought tears to my own. "Grace," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You came." I smiled, blinking back tears. "Of course I did," I said. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." He pulled out a chair for me, and I sat down, still a little in awe of the moment. He took a seat across from me, and for a moment, we just looked at each other, the memories of that night passing between us without needing to be spoken. "I don't know if you understand just how much that meal meant to me," Kevin said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "I was at my lowest point that night. I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. And you didn't just feed me, you gave me hope. You made me believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better." Tears welled in my eyes, and I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. "I'm so proud of you, Kevin," I said. "Look at what you've done. Look at who you've become." He smiled, his eyes glistening. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said. "After that night, I found a shelter that helped me get back on my feet. I worked in their kitchen, and that's where I discovered my love for cooking. One thing led to another, and I got a scholarship to culinary school. And now, here we are. I squeezed his hand, my heart overflowing with pride and joy. Here we are, I echoed, my voice barely a whisper. The rest of the evening was a blur of laughter, incredible food, and stories of the journey that had brought us both to this moment. Kevin insisted on cooking a special meal just for me, an exquisite, multi-course dinner that showcased not only his culinary talent but also his gratitude. Each dish was more delicious than the last, and I could feel the love and care that went into every bite. As the night drew to a close, Kevin walked me to the door, the warm glow of the restaurant spilling out onto the street. He hugged me tightly, and I could feel the emotion in his embrace. "Thank you, Grace," he whispered, "for everything." I hugged him back, my heart full. "Thank you, Kevin, for reminding me that even the smallest acts of kindness can make all the difference." He pulled back, smiling at me, and I could see the man he had become, strong, confident, and full of hope. "This is just the beginning," he said, his eyes shining. "I've got big plans for the future, and I hope you'll be part of them." I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. I wouldn't miss it for the world. As I walked away that night, the cold wind nipping at my cheeks, I felt a warmth inside me that no winter chill could touch. Life has a way of surprising us, of bringing people back into our lives when we least expect it. And sometimes, if we're lucky, we get to see the incredible ripple effect of a single act of kindness. Kevin had taken that meal, a simple burger and fries, and turned it into a future filled with promise. And as I looked back at the glowing sign above the restaurant door, I knew that he had given me something just as valuable, the reminder that kindness, no matter how small, always finds a way to come full circle. In the weeks that followed, Kevin and I stayed in touch. He invited me back to the restaurant several times, and each time I could see how the place had become more than just a business for him. It was a beacon for others who needed hope, a place where people could gather, share a meal, and feel like they mattered. He hired staff from the very shelters that had helped him, giving others the same chance he had once been given. One afternoon, Kevin took me aside and showed me a small room at the back of the restaurant. It was a cozy little space with a few chairs, a bookshelf, and a table. "This is our community room," he said, his voice filled with pride. "We use it to teach cooking classes for at-risk youth. I want them to know that no matter how tough things get, there's always a way forward." I looked around the room, my heart swelling with emotion. "You're making such a difference, Kevin," I said. "I know your mom would be so proud of you." He smiled, his eyes misting over. "I hope so," he said softly. "I just want to pay it forward, the way you did for me." That was the moment I realized that my small act of kindness had grown into something far greater than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about a meal anymore. It was about hope, about second chances, and about the power of human connection. Kevin had taken the seed of kindness I had offered him and nurtured it into something beautiful, something that could change lives. And as I stood there watching Kevin prepare for another cooking class, I knew that my parents had been right all along. A warm loaf of bread or a simple burger and fries really could fill a heart. And sometimes that warmth was enough to change the world, one small act at a time.